Sit down, little ghetto girl. Adults are talking. Judge Sterling's words slice through the packed courtroom. 17-year-old Kiera Jones stands frozen, every eye boring into her. Her father, David, sits in handcuffs, head bowed. Your Honor, my father is innocent. The judge slams his gavel. Security, remove this child. He points at Kiera like she's garbage. The gallery stares. Some shake their heads, others smirk. The bailiff steps forward. Kiera's father reaches toward her with shackled hands, tears streaming. The prosecutor shuffles papers, barely hiding his amusement. But Kiera doesn't move. Her spine straightens. Her chin lifts. Her eyes narrow with laser focus. In this moment, surrounded by contempt, something awakens inside her. Something dangerous. 3 months earlier, Kiera Jones sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, surrounded by towers of yellow law books. The cramped apartment in Easton felt smaller with every passing year. But these books made her world infinite. Dad, why do you keep all these old law books if you're just a construction worker? Kiera called out, holding up a battered copy of constitutional law. David Jones appeared in her doorway, still in his work clothes, concrete dust coating his boots. His weathered hands told the story of 20 years building other people's dreams. But his eyes, those same sharp, intelligent eyes Kiera inherited, told a different story. Because knowledge is the one thing they can't take from us, baby girl, he said, settling beside her on the floor. I may work with my hands, but I think with my mind. These books, they're insurance. Kiera traced the worn spine of a civil rights case study. Insurance against what? David was quiet for a long moment, watching his daughter's fingers move across the legal text like she was reading sheet music. Against a world that tries to make you small. At 17, Kiera was already accepted to 3 universities with partial scholarships. Her guidance counselor called her college material. Her teachers praised her natural intelligence, but none of them knew about the midnight hours she spent in these books, absorbing precedents and procedures like other kids absorb social media. Her bedroom walls told the real story. Where other teenagers hung posters of celebrities, Kiera had taped up landmark Supreme Court decisions. Brown versus Board, Miranda versus Arizona, Gideon versus Wainwright. Each case was a victory for someone who had been counted out. Kiera at dinner. Her mother, Lena, called from the kitchen. The Jones family gathered around their small table every night without fail. It was their sanctuary, their planning room, their place of dreams. Tonight, like every night, David asked Kiera about her day, really listened to her answers, and pushed her to think deeper. Mrs. Adams says I should consider pre-law at Oakwood University, Kiera said between bites of her mother's famous mac and cheese. Oakwood's expensive, Lena said carefully. She worked double shifts at the hospital, and still they counted every dollar. We'll find a way, David said firmly. Kiera's got something special. You can see it in how she thinks, how she questions everything. Kiera looked at her father. This man who woke up at 5 a.m. every day, who came home bone tired but still helped her with homework, who believed in her dreams, even when they seemed impossible. I want to be a lawyer, she said quietly. Not just any lawyer. I want to be the kind who fights for people like us. David smiled, the same smile that had carried him through years of being overlooked and underestimated. Then that's exactly what you'll be. But their world was about to shatter. The call came on a Tuesday morning while Kiera was getting ready for school. David had been working on a major construction project downtown, a new office building that would house law firms and financial companies. The kind of building he'd never be allowed to work inside, only build. The job site was dangerous. Safety violations were common. But workers like David couldn't complain without risking their jobs. When David saw a crane operator showing up drunk, endangering the entire crew, he did what his conscience demanded. He confronted his supervisor, Robert Stone, a man who treated the mostly black and Hispanic crew like expendable equipment. Stone, Mateo, is drunk on the crane. Someone's going to get killed, David said. Stone barely looked up from his clipboard. Mind your business, Jones. You're paid to build, not think. I'm paid to go home alive, David shot back. And so is everyone else here. That's when Stone snapped. He shoved David hard, screaming about uppity workers who don't know their place. David stumbled backward, his hard hat falling off. The other workers watched in tense silence. They'd seen this before. Stone's explosive temper, his particular hatred for anyone who questioned his authority. David steadied himself, his voice calm but firm. "Touch me again, and we'll have a problem." Stone swung first. What happened next took less than 30 seconds, but it would change everything. David defended himself, pushing Stone away when the man came at him again. Stone fell, hitting his head on a stack of rebar. By the time the police arrived, Stone had crafted his story. The security cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned. The crew, terrified of losing their jobs, said nothing. David Jones, honor student's father, devoted husband, man who'd never been arrested in his life, was handcuffed and charged with aggravated assault. And Kiera Jones' real education was about to begin. The Brighton Public Library became Kiera's second home. But it wasn't by choice. Every morning at 8 a.m. sharp, Kiera claimed the same corner table in the legal research section. The librarians knew her by name now. The teenager who spent 12 hours a day buried in case law, while her classmates worried about prom dates. "Honey, we're closing in 10 minutes, Mrs. Daisy said gently. Kiera looked up from criminal procedure manuals, her eyes red and strained. "Just 10 more minutes? I'm so close to understanding this precedent." Mrs. Daisy's expression softened. She'd watched Kiera transform from a bright student into something desperate and determined. "You can't save him if you collapse from exhaustion." But Kiera couldn't stop. Every hour she wasn't researching felt like another nail in her father's coffin. The public defender assigned to David was Adam Grant, a burned-out attorney juggling 47 active cases. When Kiera and her mother met him, he barely glanced up from his computer. Jones, he muttered, clicking through files. "Ah, yes, the construction assault. Pretty straightforward. Prosecution's offering 2 years if he pleads guilty." "I take it." Kiera's hands clenched. "But he's innocent." Stone attacked first. Grant finally looked at her, his expression mixing pity and annoyance. "Sweetheart, that's not how the system works. It's your father's word against the supervisor's. Guess who the jury will believe?" "There were witnesses," Kiera said. "Witnesses who want to keep their jobs." Grant pulled out a form. "Look, I've been doing this for 15 years. Black defendant, white victim, construction site altercation. The math is simple. 2 years is a gift." Kiera's mother spoke up quietly. "What if we fight it?" Grant laughed bitterly. "Then he's looking at 10 years minimum. Aggravated assault, possible hate crime enhancement, because Stone claims David used racial slurs. You really want to roll those dice?" Kiera felt the walls closing in. This man paid to defend her father had already given up. "Can't we get a different lawyer? Private attorneys cost $50,000 minimum. You have $50,000 lying around." The Jones family went home that night in silence. Kiera's scholarship letters sat unopened on her desk. Columbia, Stanford, Dartmouth. Dreams that felt increasingly meaningless. That's when Kiera started digging deeper. Late one night, she discovered the Easton Municipal Court Records database. It took hours to navigate, but once she did, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Judge Arthur Sterling had been presiding over criminal cases for 12 years. Kiera pulled every case file she could access, creating spreadsheets that would make a statistician proud. The numbers told a horrifying story. In cases with black defendants and white victims, Judge Sterling's sentences averaged 394% higher than state guidelines. For white defendants with black victims, sentences averaged 23% below guidelines. Kiera stared at her laptop screen at 3 a.m., hands shaking as she compiled the data. 43 black men had faced Judge Sterling in the past 2 years on similar charges. Average sentence, 8 years. Average sentence for white defendants on identical charges, 18 months. "Oh my God," she whispered to her empty bedroom. But the worst part wasn't the pattern. It was how systematic it appeared. Sterling wasn't just biased. He was methodical. Kiera found dismissed cases where white defendants had done far worse than anything David was accused of, probation for assault charges that would have sent black men away for years. Kiera printed everything, filling 3 binders with evidence of judicial bias that would make civil rights attorneys salivate. But who would listen to a 17-year-old girl at school? Kiera's world continued crumbling in smaller, more personal ways. "Kiera, you missed the college fair meeting again," her guidance counselor said after pulling her aside. "Columbia called asking about your enrollment deposit. Are you having second thoughts?" Kiera stared at the acceptance letter, the letter that used to represent everything she'd worked for. "I can't go to college while my father sits in prison for something he didn't do." "Kiera, honey, I understand you're upset, but you can't throw away your future. Your father wouldn't want that. My father is facing 10 years because nobody thinks he deserves a real defense." Miss Chin lowered her voice. Maybe he did do something wrong. Sometimes the people we love aren't who we think they are." The words hit Kiera like a physical blow. Even here, where she'd been celebrated as a model student, people assumed her father's guilt based on nothing more than his skin color. Kiera's best friend, Chloe, cornered her at lunch. "Kiera, you're destroying yourself over this. Everyone can see it. You look terrible. Your grades are slipping, and you're throwing away a full ride to Columbia." "My father is innocent," Kiera said quietly. Chloe rolled her eyes. "Come on, Kiera. He attacked his supervisor. There were witnesses. Just because you can't accept it doesn't mean the rest of us have to pretend it didn't happen. You don't know him. I know you're acting crazy. My dad says construction workers get violent all the time, especially when they're drinking or on drugs. Maybe your dad just snapped." Kiera stood up slowly. "Your dad has never worked a day of manual labor in his life, and mine has never touched drugs or alcohol." But Chloe wasn't listening. "Kiera, you're choosing him over your own future, over our friendship, over reality. It's not healthy." That afternoon, Kiera sat alone in her car outside school, watching her former friends laugh about normal teenage problems. She felt ancient, like she'd aged years in the past month. Her phone buzzed with notifications. College recruiters, scholarship committees, summer program directors, all opportunities that felt as distant as the moon. Kiera drove to the courthouse, parking across the street from the imposing building where her father's fate would be decided. She watched lawyers in expensive suits stride up the steps, briefcases in hand, confidence in every step. Then she saw a different group. Families like hers clutching public defender business cards and worry lines etched in their faces. 2 worlds that might as well have been different planets. A court clerk emerged for a cigarette break. Kiera recognized him from her research visits and approached cautiously. "Excuse me, sir. I'm researching Judge Sterling's court for a school project. Do you know anything about his judicial philosophy?" The clerk, a black man in his 50s, looked around nervously. "Little girl, let me give you some free advice. That judge has ended careers for less than what you're probably thinking. If someone you care about is facing him," he shook his head, "start praying or start running." Kiera's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" The clerk took a long drag. "Sterling don't just sentence folks. He destroys them, makes examples, sends messages, and he's got friends in high places who make sure nobody questions his methods. But that's illegal. There have to be oversight mechanisms, appeals processes." The clerk laughed bitterly. "Child, you still believe the system works the way they taught you in civics class. Sterling's been doing this for 12 years. You think nobody's noticed? You think nobody's tried to stop him?" Kiera felt her knees go weak. What happened to them? Transfer requests denied. Bar complaints dismissed. Career advancement blocked. The clerk dropped his cigarette and ground it under his heel. "That man has power you can't imagine. And your daddy." He looked at Kiera with genuine pity. "Your daddy's just another number to him." As the clerk walked away, Kiera stood alone on the courthouse steps, the weight of impossibility crushing down on her shoulders. Her father was facing a rigged system, a biased judge, and a legal process designed to chew up people like him. She was 17 years old with no money, no connections, and no real legal training. But as Kiera stood there watching the sun set behind the courthouse dome, something crystallized inside her. They expected her to give up. They expected her to accept the inevitable. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The jail visitation room smelled like disinfectant and despair. Kiera pressed her palm against the scratched plexiglass barrier, watching her father on the other side. In just 3 weeks, David Jones had aged a decade. His shoulders, once strong from years of construction work, now sagged with defeat. The orange jumpsuit hung loose on his shrinking frame. But it was his eyes that broke Kiera's heart. The same intelligent eyes that used to light up when discussing her future now stared at the table. "Baby girl," David said through the phone, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe I should just take the plea deal. 2 years. I can survive 2 years." Kiera's throat tightened. "Dad, no. You didn't do anything wrong. Wrong doesn't matter in here." David gestured around the visiting room filled with other families having desperate conversations. "Look around, Kiera. You see any of these people getting justice? You see any fair trials?" Kiera followed his gaze. In every corner, black and brown families clutched phones, tears streaming down their faces. Children asking when daddy was coming home. Wives trying to hold everything together. "This is my reality now," David continued. "And I can't let you sacrifice your life trying to change it. Columbia is calling about your enrollment. Your mother told me you have to go. I'm not leaving you here." David leaned forward, pressing his hand against the glass opposite hers. "Kiera, listen to me. I've watched you your whole life. Watched you read those law books like they were fairy tales. You were born for something bigger than this place. I was born to fight for my family. Then fight for us by becoming what you're meant to be. Don't let them destroy 2 Jones lives. One is enough." Everyone wanted her to walk away, to accept that some battles couldn't be won. That night, Kiera sat in her bedroom, surrounded by college acceptance letters, her laptop open to housing applications. The smart play was obvious. Take the Columbia scholarship, build a successful career, maybe come back in 20 years and make a difference. But as she reached for the enrollment forms, her hand brushed against one of her father's old law books. The worn copy of constitutional law fell open to the 6th Amendment. "In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense." Kiera stared at those words until they blurred. Assistance of counsel. Her father had counsel, a burned-out public defender who'd already given up. But what if? Kiera's fingers flew across her keyboard, searching legal databases with new purpose. She wasn't looking for assault precedents anymore. She was looking for something else entirely. Feta versus California, 1975. The Supreme Court ruled that defendants have a constitutional right to represent themselves in criminal proceedings. Kiera's heart started racing, but self-representation wasn't enough. Her father needed help, and she had spent months learning his case better than any lawyer. She dug deeper. People versus Sharp, Ohio Court of Appeals, 1987. The court recognized limited circumstances where family members could assist pro-SE defendants, particularly when the defendant had been denied adequate counsel. Kiera cross-referenced the ruling with Ohio's current statutes. There it was buried in Section 841.2 of the Ohio Criminal Code. A pro-SE defendant may request familial assistance in cases where counsel has been deemed inadequate, subject to court approval. The legal loophole existed. It was narrow, rarely used, and would require proving that Grant's representation was inadequate. But it was there. Kiera printed the cases, her hands shaking with excitement. For the first time in weeks, she felt hope crackling through her veins. Kiera's transformation began that night. She cleared her desk of college applications, replacing them with legal pads, case files, and procedural manuals. Her bedroom became a war room. She started with the basics, memorizing every rule of criminal procedure, every evidence standard, every objection protocol. While her classmates studied for calculus tests, Kiera studied cross-examination techniques. The public library became her law school. Kiera arrived each morning as doors opened, claimed her corner table, and didn't leave until closing. She took detailed notes on everything: jury selection strategies, opening statement structures, closing argument techniques. Mrs. Daisy, the librarian, watched Kiera's evolution with growing concern. "Kiera, dear, are you eating enough? You look thinner every day." Kiera glanced up from a witness examination manual. I'm fine, Mrs. Daisy. Just focused. What you're doing, child. It's remarkable, but it's also impossible. You know that, right? Kiera met her eyes. Impossible is just another word for something nobody's tried hard enough to achieve. Day by day, Kiera's confidence grew. She practiced opening statements in her bedroom mirror, rehearsing until every word flowed naturally. She memorized case citations, evidence rules, and procedural statutes until they became second nature. But knowledge wasn't enough. Kiera needed to understand her enemy. She spent hours researching Judge Sterling's background, his education, his career trajectory. She read every interview he'd ever given, watched every speech at legal conferences. Sterling had built his reputation on being tough on crime, code for harsh on people who look like my father. He'd run for judge on a platform of restoring order and ending the revolving door of justice. The more Kiera learned about Sterling, the more she understood what she was facing. This wasn't just a biased judge. This was a man who'd built his entire career on people like her father. But Kiera also discovered something else. Sterling's reputation wasn't as solid as it appeared. There had been whispers over the years, complaints about his conduct, questions about his sentencing patterns. Nothing had stuck because nobody had been brave enough to compile the evidence systematically. Kiera had been compiling that evidence for weeks without realizing it. 3 days before the trial, Kiera made her decision. She walked into the jail for what everyone assumed would be her goodbye visit. "Dad," she said, picking up the phone and looking directly into his eyes. "I found a way to represent you in court." David stared at her. "Baby girl, what are you talking about?" "There's a legal provision that allows family members to assist pro se defendants when their counsel is inadequate. I can be your voice in that courtroom." "Kiera, no. You're 17 years old. You don't know what you're up against." Kiera's voice hardened with resolve. "I know exactly what I'm up against. A corrupt judge who's built his career destroying people like us. A system that assumes you're guilty because of your skin color." She leaned forward, pressing her hand against the glass. "But Dad, I also know something else. I know every case Sterling has tried in the past 5 years. I know every legal precedent that applies to your situation. I know the law better than that public defender ever will." David studied his daughter's face, the determination in her eyes, the steel in her voice, the transformation from scared teenager to fierce advocate. "And I know," Kiera continued, "that knowledge is the one thing they can't take from us. You taught me that, remember?" For the first time in weeks, David Jones smiled. Not the defeated smile of a broken man, but the proud smile of a father watching his daughter become everything he'd always known she could be. "Then let's go to war, baby girl." 2 days before the trial, Kiera sat outside Stone Construction Company, watching workers leave. She'd been waiting 3 hours for Leo, the security guard listed as unavailable for comment in the police report. At 6:47 p.m., she spotted him walking toward the parking lot. "Excuse me, Leo." He turned, immediately wary. "Who's asking?" "Kiera Jones." "David Jones is my father." Leo went pale. "I can't talk to you. I told the police everything." "Did you?" "The report says you were unavailable for comment." Leo stopped walking. "Kid, I got mouths to feed. I can't lose this job." Kiera showed him the news article. "They're sending my father to prison for 10 years for something he didn't do. You saw what really happened." "I saw nothing." His voice cracked. "My father was protecting your crew from a drunk crane operator. Stone attacked first, didn't he?" Leo lit a cigarette with shaking hands. "Stone's connected. His family owns half the construction contracts in this city. People who cross him don't work here anymore. And people who let innocent men go to prison." Something in Kiera's eyes, the same steel he'd seen in her father, made Leo pause. "There's security footage," he said quietly. Kiera's heart stopped. "What?" "The cameras weren't broken like Stone claimed. I saved everything." Leo looked around, then decided, "Follow me." They walked to the office building. Leo used his key card, leading Kiera to the security office. "Stone told me to delete this," Leo said, sitting at the monitors. "So the hard drives crashed." "But you didn't." "My sister was assaulted 2 years ago. The guy got off. No evidence. I swore I'd never let that happen again." The screen flickered to life, showing construction site camera angles. Leo fast-forwarded to the incident timestamp. There's your dad talking to Stone about Mateo on the crane. Kiera watched her father approach Stone calmly, gesturing toward the unsteady crane operator. Stone's body language was aggressive from the start. Watch this. On screen, Stone shoved David hard. Her father stumbled backward, hands up peacefully. Stone advanced again, swinging wildly. Only then did David defend himself. One controlled push that sent Stone into the rebar stack. Stone came at your dad like a maniac, Leo said. Textbook self-defense. Kiera stared at the screen, tears streaming. Here was undeniable proof of her father's innocence. Why didn't you come forward? Leo ejected the USB drive. Because Stone made clear what happens to people who cross him. He handed Kiera the drive. But some things are more important than paychecks. Kiera clutched the USB like gold. This changes everything. Maybe, but Kiera... Leo's expression grew serious. Stone's brother-in-law owns Sterling and Associates, Judge Sterling's family business. They've been steering city contracts to each other for years. The pieces clicked into place. That's why Sterling is determined to convict my father. It's not bias. It's business. That judge protects Stone's interests. Workers who complain about safety violations end up in his courtroom facing trumped-up charges. Your dad's case is part of a pattern. Kiera's mind raced. She had evidence to prove her father's innocence, but also proof of corruption at the very top. Leo, will you testify? He nodded slowly. If you guarantee my family's safety, yeah, it's time someone stood up to these people. Kiera walked to her car, carrying more than evidence. She carried the key to exposing an entire corruption network. As she drove home, one thought pounded. They weren't just saving her father. They were bringing down the whole system. The morning of the trial, Kiera walked into the Easton Municipal Courthouse, carrying 3 thick binders. Media cameras flashed as she climbed the stone steps. The teenager representing her father had become news. Inside the packed courtroom, every seat was filled. Kiera spotted her mother in the front row, clutching a tissue. Behind her sat David's construction crew, taking time off work they couldn't afford. On the other side, Stone sat with his expensive legal team, smug expression intact. Judge Sterling entered, black robes flowing like a cape. The bailiff called for order as everyone stood. Kiera felt hundreds of eyes on her as she took her place at the defense table next to her father. David squeezed her hand. You sure about this, baby girl? Kiera straightened her shoulders. I've never been more sure of anything. The prosecutor, District Attorney Victor Hayes, was a political climber known for aggressive tactics and a perfect conviction rate. He'd already given 3 television interviews, calling the case a clear example of workplace violence that cannot be tolerated. Judge Sterling banged his gavel. This court is now in session. I understand there's been an unusual request regarding representation. Kiera stood, voice steady despite her racing heart. Your Honor, my name is Kiera Jones. I'm here to invoke my client's right to familial assistance under Ohio Criminal Code Section 841.2. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Sterling's face darkened. Young lady, this is highly irregular. Are you telling me you intend to represent the defendant? I'm telling you that my father, David Jones, is exercising his constitutional right to self-representation with familial assistance as established in Feta versus California and recognized under Ohio statute. Prosecutor Hayes jumped up. Your Honor, this is absurd. A 17-year-old child cannot possibly provide adequate legal representation. This is a serious felony case, not a high school mock trial. Kiera pulled out her legal brief. Hand steady now. Your Honor, if I may direct the court's attention to People v. Sharp, Ohio Court of Appeals, 1987, which specifically allows familial assistance when appointed counsel has been deemed inadequate. Judge Sterling's jaw tightened. And what makes you think Mr. Grant's representation is inadequate? The fact that Mr. Grant advised my father to plead guilty to a crime he didn't commit without reviewing crucial evidence or interviewing key witnesses. He spent exactly 14 minutes on this case before recommending a plea deal. The gallery gasped. Adam Grant, the public defender, shifted uncomfortably. Judge Sterling leaned forward, voice dripping with condescension. Miss Jones, let me explain something. This is not a game. This is not a movie where plucky teenagers save the day. This is a court of law where serious adults handle serious matters. Kiera met his gaze without flinching. With respect, Your Honor, my father's freedom is the most serious matter in my life. I've spent the last month studying every aspect of this case more thoroughly than anyone else in this room. You've spent a month? Judge Sterling laughed, the sound echoing through the courtroom. I've been practicing law for 30 years. Mr. Hayes has been prosecuting felonies for 15 years. You think 1 month of reading makes you qualified to? I think 1 month of caring makes me more qualified than a public defender who couldn't be bothered to return our phone calls. Kiera interrupted. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Sterling's face flushed red. Young lady, you will not interrupt this court. One more outburst, and I'll hold you in contempt. Kiera bowed her head slightly. My apologies, Your Honor. I was simply exercising my client's rights under established legal precedent. Prosecutor Hayes saw his opening. Your Honor, even if we allow this circus to continue, the defendant's guilt is clear. We have witness testimony, physical evidence, and a pattern of aggressive behavior. This is an open and shut case. Kiera stood again. Your Honor, the prosecution's case is built on lies, suppressed evidence, and witness intimidation. I can prove that every single allegation against my father is false. Judge Sterling's eyes narrowed dangerously. Miss Jones, those are serious accusations. Do you have any idea what you're suggesting? I'm suggesting that the truth matters, Your Honor, even in your courtroom. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Kiera had just implied that Judge Sterling's courtroom wasn't a place where truth mattered, a direct attack on his integrity. Judge Sterling's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried through the entire room. Miss Jones, you are walking on very thin ice. I suggest you remember where you are and who you're addressing. Kiera felt every person in the courtroom holding their breath. This was the moment of truth. She could back down, apologize, and hope for mercy. Or she could stand her ground and fight for her father's life. She thought about the 43 black men Judge Sterling had sent away with sentences that destroyed families and communities. Kiera lifted her chin and looked directly into Judge Sterling's eyes. Your Honor, I know exactly where I am. I'm in a courtroom where my innocent father is facing 10 years in prison because the system failed him. I know exactly who I'm addressing. A judge who took an oath to ensure justice is served fairly and impartially. The silence was deafening. Judge Sterling's knuckles were white as he gripped his gavel. Your Honor, Kiera continued, voice growing stronger. I respectfully request that you allow me to present evidence that will prove my father's innocence and expose the real criminal in this case. Judge Sterling stared at her for a long moment, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. Finally, he spoke. Miss Jones, against my better judgment and the standards of this court, I will allow you to proceed, but understand this. Any disruption, any violation of procedure, any disrespect to this court, and your father will face the maximum penalty under the law. Kiera nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. The defense is ready to proceed. As she sat down, Kiera caught her father's eye. David was looking at her with a mixture of terror and pride. She had just declared war on one of the most powerful men in the city's legal system, and Judge Sterling had just accepted her challenge. Prosecutor Hayes rose from his table, a predator's smile spreading across his face. He'd prosecuted hundreds of cases, and this 17-year-old girl was about to learn why he'd never lost. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Hayes began, his voice booming with authority. What you're about to witness is exactly why children don't belong in courtrooms. The defendant, David Jones, has a documented history of workplace violence that his daughter conveniently forgot to mention. Kiera's blood ran cold. What history? Her father had never been arrested before this incident. Hayes pulled out a thick file. 3 separate complaints filed against the defendant over the past 2 years. Aggressive behavior towards supervisors, threats against management, a pattern of escalating violence that culminated in the brutal attack on Robert Stone. Kiera shot to her feet. Objection. Those documents were never disclosed during discovery. Judge Sterling barely glanced at her. Overruled. The prosecution has the right to present all relevant evidence. But Your Honor, Brady versus Maryland requires. Miss Jones, I will not have you lecturing this court on case law you learned last week. Sit down. Hayes continued, emboldened. The defense wants you to believe this was self-defense. But the evidence shows a man who'd been building toward this explosion for months. A man who finally snapped and attacked an innocent supervisor doing his job. Kiera's hand shook as she flipped through her notes. None of this was in the original case file. These complaints had appeared out of nowhere, perfectly timed to destroy her father's credibility. Furthermore, Hayes said, pulling out photographs, the defendant's injuries were minimal compared to the severe trauma inflicted on Mr. Stone. These photos show a man who was beaten within an inch of his life. The photos passed to the jury showed Stone with a bandaged head, his face swollen and bruised. Kiera stared in shock. Her father had barely touched Stone according to the security footage. How could Stone look this injured? Objection, Kiera called out. When were these photos taken? Judge Sterling's gaze could have melted steel. Miss Jones, you will ask questions during cross-examination, not during opening statements. One more interruption, and you'll be held in contempt. Kiera felt the case slipping away. Every piece of evidence she'd carefully prepared was being countered by documents that didn't exist a week ago. The jury was already looking at her father with suspicion and fear. Hayes moved closer to the jury box. The defendant wants sympathy because he's represented by his daughter. Don't be fooled. David Jones is a dangerous man who uses his fists to solve problems. The evidence will show he attacked Robert Stone without provocation, sending an innocent man to the hospital. Kiera scribbled frantic notes. The photos had to be fake. The complaints had to be fabricated. But how could she prove it? And why was Judge Sterling allowing clearly inadmissible evidence? In conclusion, Hayes said, this case isn't about a father's love or a daughter's devotion. It's about holding violent criminals accountable for their actions. The state asks you to find David Jones guilty of aggravated assault and send a message that workplace violence will not be tolerated in our community. Hayes sat down to complete silence. The jury looked convinced. Several were already shaking their heads at Kiera, as if she were a naive child playing dress-up. Judge Sterling checked his watch. We'll take a 30-minute recess before the defense presents its opening statement. As the courtroom emptied, Kiera remained at the defense table, staring at the fabricated evidence that had just destroyed her case before it began. Her father leaned over. Kiera, baby girl, maybe we should take that plea deal. Hayes is right. I don't want you going down with me. Kiera looked at her father's defeated face, then at the prosecutor packing up his perfectly orchestrated lies. In the gallery, Stone was whispering to someone on his phone, a satisfied smirk on his face. They'd been ready for her. Every move she'd planned, every argument she'd prepared, they'd already countered. The fix was in deeper than she'd imagined. Kiera stood up, her laptop bag heavy on her shoulder. She walked toward the courthouse exit, past the reporters waiting for a statement, past the supporters who'd believed in her father's innocence. In a hallway, she pulled out her phone and stared at the USB drive Leo had given her, the security footage that proved everything. But would Judge Sterling even allow it into evidence? And how could she authenticate it without Leo, who was probably already being threatened to stay quiet? Kiera felt the weight of impossible odds crushing down on her shoulders. She was 17 years old, facing a prosecutor with unlimited resources, a biased judge, and a system designed to chew up people like her father. But as she stood there in the empty hallway, Kiera remembered something her father had taught her. Knowledge is the one thing they can't take from us. They'd ambushed her with lies. Now it was time to hit back with the truth. Kiera returned to the courtroom with fire in her eyes. The 30-minute recess had transformed her from a nervous teenager into something dangerous. She carried her laptop like a weapon. The defense may present its opening statement, Judge Sterling announced, barely concealing his irritation. Kiera stood, walking to the center of the courtroom. Every person in the packed gallery leaned forward. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the prosecution just told you a story. A carefully crafted fiction designed to send an innocent man to prison. Her voice carried new authority. But I'm going to show you the truth. She clicked her laptop. The large courtroom screen illuminated with a crystal-clear video feed. This is security footage from Stone Construction on the day of the alleged assault, footage the prosecution somehow forgot to mention. Prosecutor Hayes shot to his feet. Objection. This evidence wasn't disclosed. Your Honor, Kiera interrupted smoothly. The prosecution just introduced undisclosed evidence without warning. I'm simply following their precedent. Judge Sterling's face darkened. Where did you obtain this footage? From a security company contracted by Stone Construction, the same company that was ordered to delete this evidence. Kiera's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. But someone had the courage to preserve the truth. On screen, the footage showed David approaching Stone calmly. Stone's aggressive posture was obvious, even without sound. Watch carefully, Kiera said. You'll see Stone shove my father first. You'll see my father try to de-escalate. You'll see Stone attack again. The video played exactly as Leo had described. Stone shoved David hard. David stumbled, but kept his hands up peacefully. Stone swung wildly. Only then did David defend himself with one controlled push. The courtroom was dead silent. Several jury members sat forward, studying the screen. Hayes jumped up again. Your Honor, this footage could be doctored, manipulated. Could be, Kiera said, but it wasn't. Your Honor, I call Leo Morales to authenticate this evidence. Judge Sterling's knuckles went white around his gavel. Mr. Morales was unavailable for testimony. He's available now. Kiera nodded toward the back of the courtroom. Leo Morales walked down the aisle, his security uniform crisp, his face determined. The gallery murmured as he approached the witness stand. Judge Sterling leaned forward menacingly. Mr. Morales, are you certain you want to testify? Perjury charges carry serious penalties. Leo met his gaze without flinching. I'm certain, Your Honor. It's time to tell the truth. Kiera approached the witness stand. Mr. Morales, were you working security on the day of the incident? Yes, I witnessed everything. Did Stone attack my father first? Absolutely. Stone was aggressive from the start. Your father was trying to protect the crew from a drunk crane operator. Stone didn't want to hear it. Hayes objected frantically. Your Honor, this witness was thoroughly investigated. He was unavailable. I was threatened, Leo said loudly. Stone told me if I testified, I'd never work construction again. My family would be blacklisted. Kiera turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, this is how the system works for people like my father. Evidence disappears. Witnesses are silenced. Truth becomes inconvenient. She clicked to a new slide showing financial documents. But the corruption goes deeper. Stone Construction is owned by the Stone family. Sterling and Associates, Judge Sterling's family business, has received over $2 million in contract from Stone Construction in the past 5 years. The courtroom erupted. Judge Sterling banged his gavel violently. Miss Jones, you are in contempt. Your Honor, Kiera's voice rose above the chaos. These are public records filed with the city clerk's office. Your family business has been steering city contract to Stone Construction while you've been sending workers who complain about safety violations to prison. Hayes was on his feet, screaming objections. Judge Sterling's face was purple with rage, but Kiera wasn't finished. The fabricated complaints against my father, they were filed after Stone Construction lost a city contract due to safety violations. The fake injury photos taken weeks after the incident at a private medical facility owned by. Kiera paused for effect. Sterling and Associates. She turned to face Judge Sterling directly. Your Honor, this isn't just about my father. This is about a systematic corruption scheme that has destroyed dozens of families. Workers who speak up about unsafe conditions get arrested. Their families get destroyed. Also, your business can profit. Judge Sterling slammed his gavel. I will not tolerate these accusations in my courtroom. Kiera's voice carried to every corner of the room. Then step down from this case. Recuse yourself. Let an impartial judge hear the evidence. The silence was deafening. Judge Sterling stared at Kiera, his career hanging in the balance. Every person in the courtroom understood what was happening. A 17-year-old girl had just exposed a corruption network that reached the highest levels of the city's justice system. Furthermore, Kiera continued, her confidence absolute. I have documentation of 43 similar cases. 43 black men sentenced by this court to terms averaging 394% above state guidelines. 43 families destroyed to protect stone construction's interests. She faced the jury one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence is clear. My father is innocent. The real criminals are sitting in this courtroom right now, but they're not at the defendant's table. Kiera returned to her seat as the courtroom buzzed with shock and admiration. She had just destroyed the prosecution's case, exposed a massive corruption scheme, and proved her father's innocence beyond any doubt. Judge Sterling sat frozen, his world crumbling around him. Hayes shuffled papers frantically, knowing his perfect record was about to be shattered. And Kiera Jones, the girl they dismissed as a naive child, had just delivered the most devastating legal argument the Easton Municipal Courthouse had ever witnessed. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Judge Sterling gripped his gavel, his face ashen as the weight of Kiera's revelations settled over everyone present. The corruption scheme he'd built over 12 years had just been exposed by a 17-year-old girl. Prosecutor Hayes frantically shuffled through his papers, searching for something, anything to salvage his case. But there was nothing left. The fabricated evidence had been exposed, the witness intimidation revealed, and the financial connections laid bare for all to see. Judge Sterling's voice came out as barely a whisper. This court will recess for 15 minutes while I consider the evidence presented. But Kiera wasn't finished. She stood one final time, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had just changed history. Your Honor, before you recess, I have one more piece of evidence. Kiera pulled out a thick folder. Affidavits from 17 other construction workers who were threatened, arrested, or blacklisted after reporting safety violations to stone construction. All of their cases went through your courtroom. All received sentences far above state guidelines. She placed the folder on the clerk's desk. These men and their families deserve justice, too. Judge Sterling stared at the folder as if it contained poison. His hands trembled as he reached for it, knowing that opening it would seal his fate permanently. Your Honor, Kiera continued, the evidence is overwhelming. My father is innocent. The system failed him, but it doesn't have to fail others. Justice demands that you recuse yourself from this case immediately. The silence stretched for what felt like hours. Then slowly, Judge Sterling set down his gavel. His voice was barely audible. This court acknowledges that there may be conflicts of interest that prevent me from ruling impartially on this matter. I hereby recuse myself from this case. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed for the exits, calling their editors. The gallery buzzed with excited whispers. Kiera's mother burst into tears of relief. But Judge Sterling wasn't done. He looked directly at Kiera, his career in ruins, his reputation destroyed by a teenager with law books and determination. Miss Jones, he said, his voice carrying grudging respect. In 30 years of practice, I have never seen such thorough preparation or fearless advocacy. You have reminded this court what justice is supposed to look like. Kiera met his gaze without triumph, only the quiet dignity of someone who had fought for truth and won. Thank you, Your Honor. All I wanted was a fair trial for my father. Within hours, Judge Sophia Chun was assigned to the case. A respected jurist known for her integrity, she reviewed Kiera's evidence in her chambers before court reconvened. When she entered the courtroom, her first words changed everything. After reviewing the evidence presented by the defense, this court finds the prosecution's case to be fundamentally flawed and potentially fraudulent. All charges against David Jones are hereby dismissed. Kiera felt her knees go weak. David reached for her hand, tears streaming down his face. Judge Chun continued. Furthermore, this court is referring the evidence of corruption and witness intimidation to the State Attorney General's office for immediate investigation. Mr. Sterling, you are hereby barred from hearing any cases pending this investigation. The bailiff approached David with the key to his handcuffs. The metal clicked open, and for the first time in months, David Jones was truly free. Father and daughter embraced as the courtroom erupted in applause. Construction workers who had taken time off they couldn't afford were cheering. Kiera's mother rushed to join them, the three of them holding each other as tears of joy flowed freely. Prosecutor Hayes quietly packed his files, his perfect record shattered by a teenage girl who refused to accept injustice. Stone sat in stunned silence, knowing that criminal charges were likely coming his way. But the most powerful moment came when Leo Morales approached Kiera as the crowd began to disperse. "Miss Jones," he said, extending his hand, "thank you for giving me the courage to do what was right. My daughter is going to grow up in a world where people fight back because of what you did today." Kiera shook his hand, understanding that this victory was bigger than just her father's freedom. They had exposed a system of corruption that had destroyed countless families. They had shown that truth could triumph over power when someone was brave enough to fight for it. As they walked down the courthouse steps, Kiera was surrounded by reporters shouting questions. But she only had one statement. "My father is innocent, and today justice was served." But this isn't just about one case. This is about holding our system accountable and making sure every family gets the fair trial they deserve. David Jones put his arm around his daughter's shoulders, looking at her with wonder and pride. The girl who had spent her childhood reading law books in their small apartment had just taken on the most powerful people in the city and won. 6 months later, Kiera Jones walked across the stage at her high school graduation, but her cap held more than just a tassel. Tucked inside was her acceptance letter to Columbia Law School with a full scholarship. Not the one she'd almost lost, but a new one created specifically for students who demonstrate extraordinary courage in pursuing justice. The Jones family apartment looked different now. The same law books lined the walls, but they were joined by new additions. Framed newspaper articles about the corruption case, a photo of Kiera receiving the Easton Bar Association's Young Advocate Award, and letters from families whose loved ones were being retried after Judge Sterling's conviction. David had returned to construction work, but now as a safety supervisor with the power to shut down dangerous operations. The same crews who had watched him get arrested now looked to him as a leader and protector. "You know what I'm proudest of?" David asked his daughter as they packed boxes for a move to New York City. Kiera looked up from folding her clothes. "What, Dad? You didn't just save me. You saved every worker who will never have to face a rigged system because you had the courage to expose it." Kiera smiled, picking up the worn copy of constitutional law that had started everything. "You taught me that knowledge is the one thing they can't take from us, and you taught me that courage is what turns knowledge into justice." The investigation Kiera triggered had resulted in 17 wrongful convictions being overturned. Judge Sterling was serving 5 years for corruption. Stone Construction had been shut down, its contracts redistributed to companies that actually followed safety regulations. But Kiera's biggest victory wasn't in the courthouse. It was in the dozens of letters she received from young people who saw her story and decided they wouldn't accept injustice in their own lives. At Columbia Law School orientation, Kiera stood before 200 of the brightest legal minds in the country. But she knew something they didn't. That the most powerful force in any courtroom isn't prestige or connections or expensive suits. It's someone who refuses to be silent when they witness injustice. As Kiera began her studies, she carried with her a simple truth. Every system, no matter how powerful or corrupt, can be changed by one person brave enough to stand up and fight. What injustice will you refuse to accept? Kiera asked the camera during her final interview. What corruption will you expose? What family will you fight for? She looked directly into the lens, the same steel in her eyes that had faced down Judge Sterling. They underestimated a black girl with law books and a righteous cause. Were they underestimating about you? The system tried to break the Jones family. Instead, Kiera Jones broke the system, and that's just the beginning. If Kiera's story inspired you to never give up fighting for what's right, smash that like button, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things when they refuse to stay silent. What injustice will you refuse to accept? Tell us in the comments below.